So Curb, what it is a sensor in the panel. It measures all the breakers in that panel 8,000 times a second. And then we could take that data and I could tell you yesterday, based on where you live and how many kilowatt hours and what electric plan you're on, you spent precisely this amount. And here's some things that you could change in your behavior. By doing that, we make energy something it's tactile. You can feel it. It's actionable. You can make changes in your behavior. And most customers that we deploy our curb in will save 10 to 15% on their energy just by engaging with it and optimizing how they use it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CleanTechies Podcast. This is episode 66 of the show. I'm your host, Silas Maynor, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to bring this show to you and super thankful to you for tuning in. If you are a founder in the space, in the climate tech space in general, feel free to reach out if you are looking to get the word out about your company, potentially seeking talent or possible introductions. We're always glad to help in any way we can. That might be potential partnerships or maybe looking to get funding. We're always glad to introduce you to our network or former guests on the show as well. So please do not hesitate to reach out, as this is the entire reason behind why we do the show. So let's get into today's episode details. Today we are joined by Greg Fasullo from Elevation, and Elevation is helping holistically transform residential energy usage in three key ways. So that's, first of all, helping visualize energy usage for homeowners in a very simple and straightforward way. Secondly, they help install solar to help reduce environmental impacts and save money. So pretty straightforward on that side. And then thirdly, they work with utilities. They help utilities manage their demand response program. So kind of three really important things rolled into one. I think in particular, the first is very interesting with the visualization of the energy usage. This is something I don't think a lot of homeowners necessarily tend to think about, but it really can offer them a perspective on kind of the nuanced usage of energy in the home and potential areas for improvement on, in home upgrades with insulation, etc. So in today's episode, we talk in detail about all of those things, along with some other items that I think are worth mentioning, especially of note how their data tracking can offer feedback to appliance manufacturers. I thought that was quite fascinating. Also, how an energy efficient home actually affects real estate values, and then how his time at Berkeley shaped him. I thought that was also really fascinating, hearing his experience there. And then we talked a little bit about virtual power plants as well. So generally speaking, very fascinating episode. Super excited to be able to bring this to you. And before we get into the show, as always, we want to make thanks to our sponsors, Next Wave Partners. Next Wave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change yourself, please feel free to reach out to them at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page. And thank you again to Next Wave for sponsoring this. And without any further delay, let's get into the show. All right, welcome to the show, Greg. How are you doing today?
Hey, Silas, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Super excited to get you on. Why don't we just start out as usual with just give us a quick introduction to yourself and kind of what you're doing today.
Yeah, hi, Silas. So my name is Greg Fasullo. I'm the chief executive of a company called Elevation. We are a solar and clean energy company based out of Chandler, Arizona, just outside of Phoenix area. And we're one of the largest deployers of clean energy technology for residential homes. That's solar panels for consumers. It's things like storage, batteries at the side of the house, electric vehicle chargers, energy efficiency work with the house. And we're a little unique in that we sell to individual homeowners, but we also sell to operators of big single family rental portfolios. And by having this portfolio of portfolios, many homes connected together, we've got some intelligence services that we offer to utilities, what they call grid services, that help with reliability during times of peak grid demand.
Interesting. I would be definitely keen to learn more about this intelligence services in a bit. I guess I am really kind of curious in general, though, how you ended up getting into this space in the first place. Also very curious how your original work with AT&T and Bell Labs kind of led to this, or if
Yeah,
at all.
it's funny. I've always been associated with energy. through my career. It wasn't intentional. I worked for Bell Laboratories out of college in New Jersey. Bell Laboratories moved me to a facility in Texas very early in my career, and that division made the DC power systems that back up a telecom network. And you don't think about it today because you don't have a landline at home. But when power goes out at the bottom of each of the base stations, there's a small battery that powers that cabinet and keeps the equipment running, so you could have cell service during a brief power outage. So my background was developing that type of equipment, and what became increasingly important was the efficiency. So it was equipment when it's inefficient it generates heat, and when you're moving from equipment that was in a big central office to equipment in cabinets, every watt of heat that you put in a cabinet is really critical because somehow you have to cool that heat. So I started to focus on very high efficiency technologies, and that's just gradually morphed over time into what is now clean energy. So we're trying to figure out how to generate electricity very efficiently on the roof of a home with solar panels. So very similar. And look, I've had a passion for reducing waste. So increasing efficiency of these systems has a tremendous impact on greenhouse gas emissions. Clean energy also has an aspect that homeowners can take control of their energy cost to produce energy. So just this revolutionary technology and energy environment that we live in today. So
Hmm.
very passionate about that, very passionate about climate change. In the US, there are about 90 million single family homes. They actually produce over 20% of the total greenhouse gases in the country. So a tremendous amount of our greenhouse gas emissions, our carbon emissions, are a function of residential housing. Today, roughly 3% of residential homes have solar panel. So very underinvested in energy efficiency technologies. And look, the rest of my career, I'll be focused on how we try to change that and the
Hmm.
impact for society and climate change and the world and then individual homeowners and their costs is really substantial. So
Hmm.
all an unintentional passion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite interesting. And I am curious, before we get too much into the technology, is also I wanted to ask a little bit about your experience with UFC Berkeley back in the day. I'm kind of curious if you have any stories or kind of people you met. I'm not exactly sure when you did that from looking at your LinkedIn, but I'm curious to ask about that.
Yeah, well, Berkeley is a great place. UC Berkeley is just outside of San Francisco. It is a beautiful campus. It's actually the original campus of the University of California system. Large school, I think roughly 100,000 students. Very good in engineering and business and law, but also very large liberal arts college. The engineering building was on the very kind of northern tip of the campus up on the hill. I was actually there during the Loma Prieta earthquake in the Bay Area, which was in the late 80s. I'm kind of dating myself here. And I was in a room that had a nuclear reactor in the building because they were doing nuclear science. And the earthquake was strong enough you could see the tile floor kind of have waves go through it when the waves came through the building. So went through that experience, my first and only earthquake. So that's not the only thing I remember there, but that was probably the most memorable.
Hmm. How would you say that that experience kind of shaped you and it helped maybe potentially lead to the path that you're on now?
The college in general, the work that I did again was all around power electronics and high efficiency. It just set me up in my career for where I am today. It was a very entrepreneurial time. This was back when companies like Cisco and Apple and Sun Microsystems were kind of nearing the times where they really expanded, but still relatively young companies. So being in that tech ecosystem of the Bay Area, which has continued to thrive, just opens up your mind to thinking big. And the one thing I'd say about San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and whether it's UC Berkeley or it's Stanford, just thinking big and dreaming big and setting your aspirations high. So I definitely learned that from the experience, and that's colored my life. I've started several
Hmm.
businesses. I've managed large businesses. And I'd encourage everyone who listens to this: think big, dream big, do big things in your life, and do your part to change the world and make the world a better place. So
Hmm.
a little bit
Yeah.
of that came out of my experience at Berkeley and in the Bay Area.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's awesome. Yeah, I think why don't we move in a little bit to the technology? So you alluded to a bunch of it at the beginning here, but maybe could you walk us through, if you want to break it down by number, the key things that Elevation is doing, and yeah, we'll just start there and we can go from there.
Yeah. So what makes us unique, if you think about a house, we have three parts of our platform. We have what's called Curb Energy. It's a sensor that we put in the electric panel that measures your electricity real time and makes it visible on your on mobile apps and notifications that you get to your phone. We deploy solar, so that's the ability to create electricity, and that solar panels go on the roof and the solar inverters go on the roof. Sometimes that's associated with storage where you have a battery as well. And then lastly, we've got a suite of energy efficiency services where we upgrade the home, we do insulation, we seal leakage, we seal ducts, we make the home itself fundamentally more efficient. The first part, the Curb Energy, we call that the brain. It's really the foundation of what we do. If you think about electricity in particular, and I mean, what did you use last month on electricity? How much did you spend? You probably know from a bill that you got what you spent. How many kilowatt hours did you use? When did you use those kilowatt hours? You probably don't know. It's probably on the bill somewhere, but it's not that relevant. But what's even more important is how did you use energy yesterday? Where did you use the energy? How should you change your behavior? What things are you not doing right in your home? And you just have no idea. Energy is hard to decipher. You get 1 kilowatt hour reading for the house at any point in time, but is it my air conditioner? Is it my dishwasher? Is it my hot water tank? Is it the pool pump? Could I change my behavior? Could I change the hours where I charge my car or whatever else you do? You don't know. So Curb, what it is a sensor in the panel. It measures all the breakers in that panel 8,000 times a second. And then we could take that data and I could tell you yesterday, based on where you live and how many kilowatt hours and what electric plan you're on, you spent precisely this amount. And here's some things that you could change in your behavior. By doing that, we make energy something it's tactile, you can feel it, it's actionable, you can make changes in your behavior. And most customers that we deploy our Curb in will save 10 to 15% on their energy just by engaging with it and optimizing how they use it. So that's the first thing we do. Solar, obviously, you put solar panels on a house. There's plenty of companies that do that, but by optimizing your energy first with the Curb and understanding it, you could produce enough energy in the house and buy a smaller, essentially solar system. You don't have to buy as much solar because now you're not using as much electricity and you're using it thoughtfully. And then lastly, there's other technologies I mentioned, energy efficiency, reduce the waste, reduce the leakage in the home. And those are the three main things that Elevation does. It's a little bit unique. We're the 14th largest residential solar company. We're the only company that has a product just like what we have today with Curb, and we believe we're the largest national energy efficiency retrofit company. We've been recognized by the Department of Energy 3 years in a row as one of their sustained excellence contractors. And while it's an industry of a lot of small players and kind of regional retrofit companies, we're probably the largest in the country doing those type of services today.
Hmm. Interesting. I would be keen to understand just very briefly what markets do you serve for anybody listening, if they can kind of reach out.
Yeah, we are based out of Arizona. We're on the in the Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, California. We also serve Texas, and then we're moving into the East Coast, the two Carolinas, Florida, are our key markets today. People can go to poweredbyelevation.com and get a sense of our offerings if you live in one of those areas.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely encourage people to do that. I think that it is important that people get on top of this. I'm curious, by the way, are there any regions that you can't necessarily serve? I'm not sure what the regulations are on the space. I know there are a lot of these kind of residential solar companies that have some things inhibiting them, but I'm just kind of curious, are there any areas you cannot serve at the moment?
Fundamentally, solar works everywhere. So you any place you've got good sun, solar will work. It depends a bit on the geography. If you've got trees, you're going to have shade. and you're not going to produce as much solar. So here in Arizona or places like Texas, it's a little bit easier than if you're in northern climates with a lot of trees. That so that's one kind of physical delineation of where you want to be. There are states, and in general, think about utility companies. Utility companies built these big power plants and distribution systems, and the ability to take electricity from one place where they make it and distribute it to your house. When you start putting electricity on each home, you're competing with their business model. And the utilities, some have embraced solar and clean energy, and others have been forced to by the public utility commissions as a benefit to the greater good. There are some states and there are some utilities that have been rather successful at limiting how many people can be allowed to put solar on their homes. So there are some places there where the utility company is not favorable for solar, and the economics aren't quite as good for the consumer. Over time, that's changing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something you could always check it. Just look if you Google for solar in your location. If elevation can serve you, great. But even if we can't, find a reputable provider, or look for a provider that's got a high rating, and then look at the economics. You'll pretty quickly see if it makes sense economically or not. Most of our customers, when they finance a system and put it on the roof, what they're paying every month for that finance solar system is typically significantly lower than their electric bill was. So it's almost immediately from the day you install it,
Mm.
you're going to have a savings. The payback on the initial investment, if you just bought it and put it on the roof, is 5 to 7 years. So if you plan on living in a house more than 5 years, you're going to make money by producing your own electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say
Interesting.
that, it also depends on inflation. Today, with inflation rising as fast as it is, energy is actually going up faster than the rate of inflation in many states. States like Texas, the cost of electricity has gone up by double digits this year. So as that's happening, especially as you're not getting much return on money in a savings account, and inflation is really eating into that money, you'd be better off putting that into a solar system and other investments that are going to generate a return for you and your family, and lower your monthly cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and raise the raise the value of your home as well, I would assume. Okay, very interesting. I would be keen to though then kind of go back through the process of the three things you offer. What does it look like if somebody wants to set up it? What is the timeline from kind of start date of installing curb and then kind of going through their process? How long do you tend to measure before deciding, hey, here's how many solar panels we'll put on, etc. Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. So the curb just literally gets installed in an electric panel. That's a few hours. There's some setup, and you got a mobile app and things like that, and our technicians will train the homeowner on how to use that. But that's a very quick process. The installation for something like solar is quick. Normally the same day we show up, we put the panels on the roof, we interconnect everything, and we're done with the main physical part of the work. The long pole is the permitting. So you have to permit to put it on the roof. You have to get approval from the utility. You've got to inspect after it's done. You've got to get approval to connect to the grid. There's a process typically where the utility will come out before they what you can call activate the solar system and produce electricity, and that tends to vary by geography. There's some cities where just getting a building permit for any work on your house, if you're putting in a pool or you're putting up a fence or you're putting up solar, that could sometimes take months today. So it just really depends regionally. There's certain cities that are very fast, and literally you could buy solar and have it on your roof and running within 2 weeks. And we've done that for customers. There are other utilities where they'll only look at 30 applications a month, and you're in line. It could be several hundred people in front of you, and it could be 6 to 9 to 12 months before you can get going. So that's that. I would say that's the outlier. In most locations, within 2 to 3 months from the very beginning to the very end, you could have a system bought and installed and operating in your house.
Mhm. And what about the energy efficiency upgrades? I'm kind of curious if you could break down what are the typical areas that you see that you guys do a lot of work in to upgrade these homes in general, and what are the things people should be aware of?
Yeah, the simple things that we do. Most of the customers that do energy efficiency with us, they're initially looking for attic insulation, and you can go online and you can look for companies that'll spray insulation in your attic. What we do is a little bit more thoughtful, and it's a little more extensive in the house. We do what's called a pressure test with the house, where we put essentially a fan and um, a door on the house that pressurizes the entire house. We pump air into the house, and then we measure the leakage. So how much of that air leaks back out of the house, and then we find and we seal all of those leaks. That process takes the better part of a day, but our technicians will show up. What you find are places where there's penetrations in your roof. So maybe there's some ductwork with your air conditioning that there's a gap. Well, we'll fill that. Maybe there's a gap going outside the house and you need a caulk, or leaking windows, things like that in the house. The items that we can repair, we repair, and then ultimately we'll measure the difference between the leakage of the house before, the leakage of the house afterwards, and then on top of that, we'll spray insulation in the attic as well. So it's about a day process for energy efficiency. It's typically just a few $1,000s to do the whole process. The two things that most of our customers will tell us afterwards is, first, they can notice the difference in comfort, especially if you're in a hot climate like Texas or Arizona or Southern California. The home will actually be more comfortable because now the thermostat can better regulate that house. And then look, we've had customers that they've cut their bill by 30% the next month. That's again a little bit of an outlier. Our typical customer will save 10 to 20% on their electric bill, but you'll really notice in the hot cold months that the house is noticeably more comfortable than it was before you did this. Outside of services from Elevation, there's some very simple things that I'd always recommend to consumers. If you've got incandescent light bulbs, change them out. That's a relatively quick payback because LED lights are very cheap these days, and they're going to run just as well as your incandescent. And you probably won't have a light bulb burning out if you do that. That's one of your larger loads in the house, is your electricity for lighting. The next big one, obviously, is your air conditioner, and you can replace it with a higher efficiency. That usually doesn't make sense, but the easy thing is put in a smart thermostat. Get a Nest thermostat or an Ecobee thermostat, and you can connect it to your phone, and they'll automatically save. And sometimes they'll even be subsidized by your utility company if you participate in some of their regional demand response programs. So go to your utility, see if they've got rebates for energy efficiency, see if they give you rebates on thermostats, and those are very easy things that any homeowner can do.
Interesting. One thing I'm curious is, do you have any data points on the real estate values of homes once they're all kind of retrofitted with solar plus the upgrades?
Yeah. Look, the National Association of Realtors, there's a handful of others have done studies on the value of a house. If you can reduce the energy cost of the house by $1,000 a year, which is typically what our homeowners will see with energy efficiency and behavioral change through curb, that can increase the value of the house from $8,000 to $10,000. There's another study, I think this is from forget which one I'm thinking of. I'm not looking at right in front of me right here, but it was roughly a 3% increase in the value of the house. So yeah, it definitely has. There's some certifications that you could also get if you've done energy efficiency. If you've done the work with Elevation, you'll get a full report that we do on the house that shows the pressure test. It shows the results before and after. It projects the savings, and you can use that as part of the sale process for a prospective buyer. Say in general, people aren't going to buy a house because of the cost of energy, but as people are more aware of how much energy costs, and with rising inflation today, it's always helpful to have shown that you've done things like that to the house. So it could be worth several $1,000s in value to the home when you sell.
Interesting. And I want to also kind of talk about, there might be two things we can go down the route here. Is, you mentioned early on the energy efficiency intelligence programs for the utilities that you offer. I'm kind of curious, when you look at a lot of these homes connected in this way to the grid, how does this affect kind of overall the, I guess you could say, resiliency of the grid? And could you talk a little bit more about those services that you offer to the utility in conjunction with this?
Yeah, so we have done pilot programs for what are called virtual power plants. So a power plant, you build a power plant and it generates electricity. But you could also go on the consumption side. If you can control the consumption and reduce the usage of electricity, you could think about it as a virtual power plant. So rather than build a 40 megawatt power plant to supply load, you can have a software platform that reduces 40 megawatts of load on the grid to offset the needed capacity for the grid. The issue that most of the operators have is especially in areas like Arizona, you got growing populations, you've got increases in the demand for electricity. At the same time, we're shutting down our coal plants. You really aren't building nuclear plants, and even fossil fuel plants like natural gas are difficult and expensive to build. So there's a lack of capacity on the grid, not enough supply given the amount of demand. In Arizona alone, it's forecasted that we're going to need about 3 gigawatts of virtual capacity, so a massive amount of capacity in the next 10 years in order to meet the growth in demand. Our programs are a little unique in that they target homes, and typically residential homes are not a good grid resource because I mean it's not a big process, or it's not a maintenance team. You're not sure the home is online, and you can't manually go and talk to thousands of consumers and ask them to turn down their thermostat. But what we do is we connect across these portfolios of homes. We've shown that each home is worth about a kilowatt of load capacity virtually to the grid. That's without impacting comfort for people in the home. We do it by adjusting how the thermostat runs, and it does make a slight difference on the temperatures in the home, but we do that on a cyclical basis. So people are still comfortable. And then obviously we let people opt out if they're uncomfortable. But by connecting portfolios of homes, 1,000 homes can be a megawatt resource for a grid operator. And we've shown that here in Arizona. We've also got a program that we're just about to launch. We were awarded a Department of Energy grant last year to do the same thing on the East Coast. And we're doing that with Duke Energy and a few other partners in the Carolinas.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that is fascinating. I think obviously I've heard other people on the show describe the difficulties of working with residential because you have to coordinate a lot of things, and it can have an effect on the grid. Sometimes, if the grid is pretty archaic, it can be a little bit negative or cause stress on the grid. But I think it's interesting when you look at it from a holistic perspective to help kind of be that rubber band as the energy is catching up to the demand, right? As the energy generation is catching up. So that's interesting. I do want to ask, I think kind of can loop these together, and if they're interested, you can kind of go down the rabbit hole with them. But a lot of people talk about right now AI and cybersecurity, and I'm just kind of curious if you could comment on those two topics within using your platform if people are concerned about the data and cybersecurity issues, or if you also want to comment on how you use and implement AI to help your software to run better.
Yeah, look, so on the first one, look, we're always vigilant on cybersecurity threats and really making sure that we keep data secure. Now it is just energy data, so it's maybe not as personal or sensitive as financial information or health information, but we still treat it as critical data. The ability, though, to take energy data and use the energy to track the health of appliances in the home is really interesting from a homeowner's perspective. Or if you think about these big single family rental companies that have portfolios of homes, being able to track the health of the individual appliances, and one, to see if they're working properly, but more importantly, to be able to predict when they're going to fail. So we actually ran a pilot this summer, and we were able to detect 35 of I think it was about 200 homes that we did the pilot on. Of the pilot, we found 35 air conditioners that were having issues in the house, either a startup issue or an operating issue, and we could predict or project at least equipment that was going to need maintenance or wasn't operating properly and was costing more than it should for the homeowner. So energy data is really interesting. You can look at an appliance, and by watching its energy footprint, you can see when it starts to deviate from what's normal. And by using that deviation to project when it might fail, you can schedule a service call as opposed to having it fail and having all of a sudden have an emergency truck roll, which is much more expensive.
hmm That is quite interesting. Have you, I mean, is this even possible to potentially partner with some of these appliance manufacturers to be able to, I guess, kind of weed through the data and find if there are ways to identify improvements for their manufacturing process to avoid these failures in the
Yeah,
future?
yeah, certainly. I think that's part of it. You can give the OEMs feedback on how their equipment's operating. I also think by shining a light on the energy, it just creates even more incentive to make energy efficient appliances. And we are working with companies that do home warranty services. So we can leverage this data. We can detect an air conditioner or a dishwasher that looks like it's operating improperly. And we could feed that right into the warranty company. So a homeowner could literally have a service where the air conditioner technician shows up and they didn't even know why they're there. And they repair the bad capacitor for a few dollars, and they never have a failure. But that otherwise, if they hadn't had our data and that connectivity, they would have woken up and, for example, been hot in the middle of the night because the air conditioner is not running and it finally failed, and we could prevent that from happening. And I
hmm
could speak from experience because it happened to me this summer. The middle of the night, my air conditioner it was running all night. I'm waking up in bed and it feels kind of warm in here. So you, you never know. It was
hmm
working fine at 8 o'clock at night and it wasn't working fine at 4 in the morning. So you just never know.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point you make about shining a light on the data, because I think that the more people see the transparency of kind of what's actually going on, it starts to, as you mentioned, bring attention to it. So then people are kind of thinking about it more front of mind, but also to, I guess it kind of comes into living intentionally, right? And thinking about, hey, how much are we using? Are we using what we need to? Are we wasting, etc.? This brings me to two questions. I want to go on the first one first, because it's kind of just a quick data point. Is, do you have an idea, or do we have an idea or a data point on how much energy is hypothetically wasted from residential energy usage in the U.S. on a annual basis, or some type of metric?
I don't have a precise number on what the aggregate waste is. But I point back to the greenhouse gas emissions. The fact that residential homes represent 20% of our greenhouse gas, and that's the total emissions in the US. That is a massive number, and much higher than it needs to be. That only 3 million of those homes have solar deployed of the 90 million homes, the 3%. Again, that just shows there's a massive opportunity here to invest. And I think energy is an easy thing to overlook. So if you're paying your mortgage, you're paying your rent, you're thinking about putting food on the table and all the events that your kids are in and the things that are going on in your family and your job and every day. Very easy to not think about energy cost. Hopefully this year that to some degree it's changed because of inflation, because of the price of gas, because of the price of electricity in some states. But there's a massive opportunity for homeowners, for renters, to reduce their living costs by focusing on energy. Typically, your electric bill is either your second or third largest bill after your mortgage itself, or your rent if you're renting an apartment. So it's substantial, and if you could reduce that by 20-30%, it could have a meaningful impact on your budget. So
Mhm.
I think that those numbers are the ones I would think about. They're tangible for a consumer, they're tangible
Mhm.
for a homeowner, and the more people are aware of energy, it's actually not that hard just to step back and get a plan of how you can save. And I mentioned some of the things. Elevation is a company that could help, but there's plenty of things you could do to reduce your electric cost and save. And just people have to think about it that way. It's an
Mhm.
opportunity.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. The other part of that question, which was around coming off the data bits, are how, given that this is a this is not an easy business, what Elevation is doing. It, a lot of benefit here, but it's not an easy business because it's direct to individual consumers and not, several large clients. How do you go about educating your customers kind of en masse, whether that's after they've installed these softwares or this equipment, or beforehand, and trying to get them kind of interested in this?
Yeah, it's education. I think that's a really important part. We do a lot of marketing around energy. Like utility companies do that as well. A lot of times they're mandated by the PUCs, but it's just continued education on the opportunity and the cost. the society to some degree too. There's an increasing awareness of climate change and personal behavior and how your own behavior impacts climate change and things like plastic waste. But energy waste is just as big of an issue for us long term. And I think that extends past electricity. Electricity, I mean, natural gas. Do you have natural gas in a house or not? Water is another precious commodity, and what are we doing to maintain water? You see what's happening to Lake Mead out here in the Southwest and the Colorado River, and how many people depend on that water. So I think for all of these kind of conservation efforts, it's awareness, it's marketing, and then a little bit it's natural just because of climate change and growing awareness that everyone has a role to play.
Very interesting. I guess maybe just a couple last things here I usually like to talk about are what are your typical struggles or what are you finding when it comes to talent, whether that's internally on very specific technical roles or potentially other roles within the company. What are you finding the market to be like, and what do you typically look for in people who are interested in working in
Yeah,
this space?
look, it helps to be a mission-driven business. So for employees that come to Elevation, first, we're a values-oriented company, and we live by our core values. Employees want to be part of a company that values them, but we are passionate. We care about what we're doing. We don't settle for ordinary. We overcommit. We're an ethical company. We do the right thing, and we do it with a positive attitude. It's a fun place to work with people that get along with each other, and look, everyone's passionate about making a difference every day. That said, look, it's a difficult time to hire. There's a shortage of skilled positions like engineers. There's a shortage of other positions, everything from installers to electricians to clerical staff. But you've got to pay competitively. You've got to have a great working environment, and it helps to be a company that's making a difference with something as important as climate change and is values oriented and really trying to be a fantastic place to work. So just what we do every day helps, but it's been challenging. It's amazing how difficult or how different the world is from a talent and labor perspective today. So
hmm Yeah, it is interesting to see some of those challenges. Obviously, the kind of that's what we do. That's what I do, at least in my day job. So it is interesting to hear your struggles there. I know that there's usually talk about the labor issues typically in the Southwest is a big struggle to find kind of skilled talent. So that's fascinating to hear. I guess maybe any final thoughts you want to leave us with? Any items that we may not have covered that you think are worth bringing up to close off the show here?
yeah, I would just encourage everyone who's listening, if you're interested in clean energy as a career, I think there's plenty of opportunity to make a difference, and we encourage you to try to do so. We need all the help we can to slow the pace of climate change. If you're a homeowner and you're interested in clean energy technology, you're thinking about energy as an opportunity to save for your family or do something for the community. I mean, I always encourage people to move. It's a decision that's really easy to put off because it's not something you have to do. You can keep buying electricity from the grid, but long term, you can lower your costs with batteries. You can ensure resiliency so your house has power if the grid goes down. Be proactive, either from a career perspective, join the industry and help us make a difference, or from a user perspective, adopt clean energy and make a difference. So I'd encourage everyone who's listening to think that way. And when you're at an opportune time, either purchasing solar for your house or making a career decision, think clean energy and think long term and think about the greater good.
So awesome. Thanks so much, Greg, for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I looking forward to seeing what you guys continue to do and seeing how you impact the country and perhaps beyond at some point. So thank you so much for coming on, Greg.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, Silas.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Please let us know what you thought of the show in the comments, wherever you're listening. If you want to comment on the social post, we always appreciate feedback. In particular, if you want to continue the conversation and find one topic worth discussing further, again, please reach us in any way. You can do that through the Slack channel or on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Many ways to reach us. We're pretty responsive everywhere. And of course, please do share this with somebody who might find it interesting. I think especially there's a lot of people that we all probably know who could benefit from this technology. So really recommend sharing this with somebody who might find it fascinating, or at least have a discussion with them about these details, and use this. Send them towards the podcast if they're interested in learning more in more detail to hear what Greg was talking about. We also, of course, recommend that you do reach out to Greg and his team on LinkedIn, through LinkedIn, to learn more about Elevation. And if you are joining us for the first time and you enjoyed the episode, we really, really appreciate any reviews that you can leave us on Apple Podcasts. It's extremely helpful for us to get further ranking and to grow the show, and to grow basically more people knowing about climate technologies. So many people are not familiar with these things, so that's why we started the show. So we ask you to help us in that journey. On the note of next episode, so next episode we have a special segment with Tucker Perkins from the Propane Education and Research Council, also known as PERC, and he discusses the use of propane in the energy transition. We also talked about renewable propane. Generally speaking, I thought it was a quite fascinating episode because this is not really something I've ever actually heard mentioned at all in the energy transition side of things, or climate tech generally. So I thought it was quite fascinating to speak with him and hear his thoughts about the future of propane, etc. So really some pretty interesting nuggets, and he had a lot of things to share. Generally speaking, super fascinating career in general. So really great episode. Thank you for tuning into that one when it comes out next. And thank you for tuning into the CleanTechies podcast today. We will see you next time.